So it's a great honor to be joined by Alan Dershowitz, one of America's greatest constitutional and legal scholar, whose work I've been following for some time. Just a quick introduction. For 50 years, he has been the professor of law at Harvard University, Harvard Law School, now Emeritus. He has written numerous books on legal matters and advocacy for Israel. He is also a practicing attorney who has defended a list of very, very controversial clients, some of which we will discuss momentarily. And currently, he's the host of The Der Show, where he voices opinions from a constitutional law perspective on current events. It is a great pleasure and an honor to meet you, Alan, and shalom.
Thank you so much, and shalom to you, and thanks for having me on your show, and thanks for reading my material and listening to what I have to say. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah. Again, I've been following your work for some time, but again, given that introduction, it would impress upon people that you are quite a big deal in the American legal circle. But unfortunately enough, the first time that I've ever heard of your name, it was in connection to your defense of one of your very controversial clients, one Jeffrey Epstein, and subsequently another controversial client who happened to be the former president of the United States, Donald Trump.
I specialize in controversial clients. I follow in the footsteps of John Adams, the second president of the United States, who represented the most controversial defendants in the early history of America, the soldiers who committed the alleged Boston Massacre. And I think of myself as somebody who will always defend the most controversial people, the most despised, the most hated people. Unless you have somebody to defend them, our legal system will not work. We will become the former Soviet Union, Iran, China, Belarus, Cuba, and other countries. Winston Churchill once said, "You judge democracy by how it treats its most despised people." And my job is to defend them and present the best possible defense I can. I don't like them. I don't approve of them often. I don't support their views, but I'm like a doctor in the emergency ward, and nobody questions a doctor's or a priest's or a psychiatrist giving professional services to people who are controversial, who they don't like, but people do challenge lawyers all the time, but I accept that challenge.
Of course. Just to get a bit personal, I used to be a subscriber to the New Yorker magazine, and I actually saw a profile on you. It was titled "The Devil's Advocate." Aptly enough, I think it was in 2019, where the article states that you've been defending a whole list of very controversial guests, ending with one Jeffrey Epstein. And you've said yourself that usually when you do a profile on a major newspaper or magazine, you get with the subject and you interview them and you spend some time with them. But in this case, the person writing this particular profile did not meet you. Is that correct?
Well, it was a hit job. The editor-in-chief of the New Yorker hates me personally because of what I represent. He is virulently anti-Israel, virulently anti-Trump, and he assigned his reporter to do a hit job on me. The first thing she did is go to a neo-Nazi website called rents.com and get much of her original information going back to the 1960s from that Nazi website. She admitted to my son that was her first source. And, it was a despicable job of hit journalism. It had no relationship to the truth, gave me no real opportunity to respond, promised it would present evidence on both sides, but it didn't. I'll give you an example. Obviously, that not only did I represent Jeffrey Epstein, but a woman named Virginia Giuffre claimed that I had sex with her on 7 occasions. I proved conclusively that I never met her. When she told the FBI who she had sex with, she did not include me. She did not include me when she spoke to other people. Her own lawyer on tape said she's wrong, simply wrong. There's no way she could have met you in the places you say she met you. Another one of her lawyers disputed that any high profile people were involved. The evidence was just absolutely overwhelming. I presented the New Yorker with the tapes, with the material. They didn't print it, and they acted as if none of it existed. And so people came away thinking that maybe I actually did have some sexual contact with a woman I absolutely never met. And I will prove that conclusively at the trial. But, reputation can be damaged very, very quickly.
Mhm.
And so I'm suing her. I'm also suing CNN. I answered a question in the Senate about quid pro quo. And I said, if a quid pro quo is unlawful or illegal, a president could be impeached. They took out the words unlawful and illegal. They doctored the tape and had the commentators say, oh, Dershowitz said a president can be allowed to continue in the office even if he did something illegal or unlawful, totally distorting my views. So, I fight back, and it's been expensive and difficult, but I have to defend my own reputation, my integrity, and I have to defend the integrity of the media and not let them get away with making up false stories.
Yes. Of course. Here's my question. Even if Virginia Giuffre's story is completely fabricated, which I believe is true in some parts, or maybe in whole. I've actually read that book that you wrote where you defend yourself, and I'm quite convinced that she must be making most of those things up with in her involvement with you. So there is, but nevertheless, your defense of Mr. Epstein would probably alienate you with many, especially in the Republican side, because they assume that Epstein is in bed with both Bill and Hillary Clinton, while your defense of Trump would alienate you to your former Democratic friends. Again, you've
Right.
said it yourself. You've never voted Republican in your life. It's a Democratic voting record all the way from Kennedy to Biden, I'm assuming.
I also defended Bill Clinton in his impeachment
Yes.
and defended Senator Alan Cranston. I defended Governor Edwards. All of my political cases have been Democrats up until Trump, but I'm not going to let partisan considerations affect my defense of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and of course, the extreme left as well as the radical right would obviously find you abhorrent because of your defense of the modern state of Israel.
Right.
So my question to you is, it must have taken a lot to borrow that famous Jewish phrase, chutzpah, in order to find yourself alienated by everyone on the political spectrum. You don't strike me as a polemicist or a provocateur. So, Alan, Professor Dershowitz, how do you do that?
Well, I wrote a book called Chutzpah. I've always had chutzpah. I've always been willing to stand up to repression and authoritarianism. And all my life, I've fought back. I don't want to have friends who judge me based on who I defend and how I, live my life. My personal life has been without flaw. I've never done anything improper in relation to a woman or a child or anything like that. My professional life has been without flaw too. I defend people ethically and properly, and I'm very proud of both my personal life and my professional life. And people who know me are equally proud. But the extremists in our divided country will find fault. And I don't try to go to the right to get support from the right or to the left to get support from the left. I try to tell the truth. I have a new book coming out. I think people will be very interested in reading it. It's called The Price of Principle.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells the story of what happened essentially to me, but to many others who have stuck by principle, who satisfy the shoe on the other foot test, who don't make decisions based on partisan considerations, but to make decisions based on principles. And that's become a very difficult and expensive thing to do today. Partisanship trumps principle throughout the country and in the media. And the result is a divided country with people hearing only one side of the story and listening to their own silos. And we are a much poorer country for it.
Yes. Just one more question until we get to the main topic of our conversation, which is abortion. And I'm sure that in our discussion, we'll manage to alienate more of the people who used to be your friends and fans.
I'm sure that's right. Yeah.
So my question would be, so Harvard University, I'm in Vietnam, people still view the name Harvard University with some reverence. But as I've talked to several people who are from there, and who have heard experiences from people who have taught there as well as learned there, some of them may lean more to the right than others. They all say that is essentially a one-party state where the prominent political ideology is this one form of left liberalism. And of course, you, Alan, is a left liberal. So why do you feel?
I'm not left. I'm a liberal, leaning leftish, but yes. I'm not. I don't associate myself with the hard left, certainly. Yeah.
Pardon me, but yeah. Well, a liberal like yourself should be more than welcome at Harvard University. But why is there sudden alienation from that environment?
Well, because of my support for Israel, because of which is very unpopular on college campuses today, because of my support for free speech, which is unpopular on universities today, and because of my support for or my opposition to the impeachment of Donald Trump. When I was recently invited to speak at the Harvard Law School, where I taught for 50 years, they had to move the event off campus for fear that it would be disrupted by protesters. And so it's very hard for me to speak at universities. Since I defended the Constitution on behalf of Donald Trump, I have not been invited by any major university to speak. So It's not Harvard alone. It's every major American university, with obviously some exceptions like Liberty University and a few others, which have a political orthodoxy. And if you break that political orthodoxy, you're canceled and not allowed to speak. I've even been canceled by Jewish organizations like the 92nd Street Y and Temple Emmanuel and the Ramah School in New York. People, in that case, they just don't want controversy. In other cases, they just fundamentally disagree with my centrist libertarian position. I refuse to take a litmus test and say, I agree with everything the Democrats say, or I agree with everything the Republicans say. And we'll obviously get to that when we talk about abortion.
Mm-hmm. Yes, let's get on with it. So you're a very intriguing person, Alan. One of the things that makes you very intriguing is that as a pro-choicer, you opposed the 1973 Roe versus Wade verdict. And I'd like you to explain on constitutional grounds, why did you take this position? And I'm assuming that you're still taking this position now, 50 or so years later.
Well, I don't think Roe versus Wade should be overruled. In 1973, I was somewhat critical of it. I think it's a close question. I don't agree with people who say that there's nothing in the Constitution to protect the right of privacy. There is. The Fourth Amendment talks about the right of the people to be secure in their persons. Mm-hmm. And the word secure really meant privacy back in the day that the Bill of Rights was adopted. I think that there could have been a stronger argument for a woman's right to choose, based largely on health considerations and bodily integrity, and also the 9th and 10th Amendments. I think an opinion could have been written. It would have been very difficult because, abortion is not at all like gay rights. Gay rights has no victims. It's nobody's business if two people have sex, if they're of the same gender. It's nobody's business if they want to marry. Nobody's hurt. But if you believe that a fetus, at some point at least, has some interests, if not rights, then there's a conflict. And I myself believe that in the early stages of pregnancy, there should be an absolute right to terminate the pregnancy. I don't think the interests of the fetus are sufficiently compelling. For example, I'm also in favor of birth control. Nobody has the right to be born, so birth control has no victims. But when it comes to late-term abortions of a fetus whose life could be saved, then one second, please. Yeah, when it comes to late-term abortions, and the fetus could be saved and could be born. Obviously, I have a different view, and the question is, should these decisions be made legislatively or constitutionally? Those are hard questions. But for example, if the Supreme Court were to overrule Roe versus Wade, which I disagree with, I don't think they should. That doesn't mean that it follows that gay marriage will be overruled, or the right of a black man to marry a white woman will be challenged. There are no victims there, or the right to birth control. There are no victims there. I divide rights into two groups: rights with victims, for example, the right to bear arms, the right to have guns, has potential victims, people who are shot and killed by people who improperly use their guns. Abortion, there is another side to that story. On the other hand, many other rights are victimless. So I think the Supreme Court should make that distinction. I'm writing about that right now.
Yes. So I'm not a Harvard Law student. I've not had the fortune to be a participant of your courses, one of your courses. But from my reading, I've come to conclude that Roe versus Wade may be one of the worst Supreme Court decisions. Well, there's the constitutional ground in that it is kind of a legal fiction. But ever since the decision has been made, the confirmation of justices, both from Republicans and Democrats alike, have been based on the justice's opinion, the potential justice's opinion on whether or not they support Roe versus Wade.
Right.
And of course, there's the originalist movement, which has been sprung out in order to overturn this one Supreme Court decision. And so the intense focus on Roe versus Wade takes away from the justice's views on any other legal or constitutional matter. So
I agree. And, it's interesting. Someday I might write a book on what if Roe versus Wade hadn't been decided, or what if the decision was made that there is no federal constitutional right to an abortion. What if that had happened? What would have happened? How many states would have passed abortion permissions, and how many would have passed abortion bans? How would it have affected elections? Would it have hurt the Republicans? I think it would have hurt the Republicans. Would it change the nature of the Supreme Court? It's a very interesting what if question. We'll never know, because obviously we've had 50 years or almost 50 years since Roe versus Wade, and Roe versus Wade is the law, at least for the next month or so. We don't know what it will be after that. But the what if question is a very interesting one. I don't know how necessarily it would be resolved, but it's fascinating to think about it.
Yes. As an aside, I would like to hear your opinion on this recent event where the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has been denied communion because of her support for, I guess, abortion rights or a woman's right to choose. I myself am studying to become a Catholic, so I hold the Catholic Church's view on abortion. So we are on opposing sides here, which makes it a very interesting discussion. But yeah, what do you think of Nancy Pelosi and her diocese of the Catholic Church?
Well, the Catholic Church is a private organization, a religious organization. It's the right to set the rules. It's made some dreadful mistakes over the years: the Inquisition, the Crusades, Pope Pius's support of Hitler. Dreadful mistakes. And it's done some great, wonderful things. like every religion, it's a mixed picture. And we who are not Catholics have the right to judge Catholics by their political decisions, but we have no right to tell the Catholic Church what to do. And so the Catholic Church is completely within its rights to deny Nancy Pelosi communion along with John Kerry and perhaps Joe Biden. That's their right. And it's our right to criticize the decision on the merits substantively. It's not our right to tell the Catholic Church what to do. We obviously can't bring a lawsuit. That would be in violation of the First Amendment. So we each have the right to express our views on that.
Yes. Right. So you said in one of the Dershow episodes, and I remember feeling quite irritated, and that's a pretty good thing. There are times when I wholeheartedly agree with you, Alan, and there are times when I find myself, yeah, he's
good.
He's not.
That's the way it should be. Yeah.
Sorry,
yeah.
Not with you on this one. And of course, that would be your opposition to the idea of natural law. And
totally
and
opposed to natural law. Yeah.
Yes, and I'd like to hear your reasoning behind it.
It's a fraud. Nature doesn't answer questions. Nature describes. It's a natural law is the part of the naturalistic fallacy. Nature doesn't tell us whether slavery was good or bad, because slavery existed for most of human time. Slavery doesn't tell us whether misogyny is good or bad. Misogyny has lasted for many, many years. Nature doesn't tell us whether eating animals is good or bad. We eat them today, and maybe someday there'll be a consensus in the world. I've written a whole book about this called Rights from Wrongs, in which I categorically, totally, and unequivocally reject any aspect of natural law. Law is a human concept developed by humans to deal with intractable and difficult issues. We should look to nature for facts that will help us create legal doctrines, but there is no such thing as natural law. God doesn't speak to human beings, doesn't tell us what to do. If God does speak, he speaks in multiple tongues and different things. The Bible justifies slavery. The Bible justifies misogyny. Every religious doctrine throughout the world justifies terrible, terrible, terrible things. So I don't want to blame God on the terrible human disasters that have been caused. So I am completely, categorically, totally, unequivocally opposed to any concept of natural law.
See, well, to that, two objections can be raised. I know that I'm not Thomas Aquinas here, but here we go. One, well, the idea of natural law does not mean that, well, the law of nature, which itself is lawlessness, as Thomas Hobbes illustrates it. It's not. It's like that David Hume conundrum of is and ought. Well, what you seem to posit is that natural law is the way nature is, and therefore humans are supposed to conform to it as well as all living things. But, well, the law of natural law, as illustrated by Aquinas, is more of an ought, is how humans as well as all other living things should behave and act to each other as well as to.
Well, I'm happy to have rules that tell us how they should act, but I'm not happy to attribute it to nature. It's a human concept.
Yes, and the second objection, which leads me to it, is that, well, if laws are created by humans, then what prevents it from being just a relativist construct? Because
nothing prevents it. It is a relativist construct. I am a relativist. I'm a moral relativist. I don't believe in absolutes. And I don't believe that the law believes in absolutes. I mean, the law can state things in absolute terms in an effort to try to achieve good results. No restrictions on free speech, but in real life, of course, there are going to be restrictions on free speech. Never kill an innocent person. But if you're driving a trolley and there are two tracks, and the brakes go out, and if you don't divert into track B, you'll kill 5 people, and if you do divert into track A, you'll kill only one person. There's no natural law solution to that problem. I mean, natural law would say you never, under any circumstances, kill an innocent person. But if you have to kill an innocent person to save five innocent people, maybe there is an exception there. So I don't accept natural law.
Okay. So my next question to you is, so according to what I've read in the Dobbs versus Jackson decision, which if it became law the way that Justice Alito intended it to be, then abortion would not be illegal. It would be decided by the states, and of course, the more democratic states would make it a bit less restrictive, and the red states, the Republican states, would make it more restrictive. So it's to you, it's not an ideal outcome. So how so?
Well, it's maybe a proper outcome constitutionally. Reasonable people would disagree about that, but to have one country in which people in one state must bear a child even if they don't want to, and people in another state can have an abortion even up to the very end of pregnancy, is not a perfect solution. People will travel from state to state to get abortions if they can't get it in one state. We may have states trying to ban that too, banning travel from one state to another in order to get an abortion. It will be a mess. Congress may ultimately pass a national pro-abortion statute, which will be challenged constitutionally in the courts, and it will divide the country even more. Remember, there's a big difference between the question, should Roe versus Wade have been decided the way it was in 1973, and should it be overruled 50 years later without any changes occurring except for the personnel on the Supreme Court? Will that disparage the credibility and integrity of the Supreme Court? I think it will.
So, if you are a member of the United States Supreme Court, to what extent do you codify abortion as a right, either constitutionally or legally? Because even if abortion is legal, it should be limited according to the duration of the pregnancy, as in you cannot. I don't think it's reasonable to permit an abortion up to, say, the hour of birth or within the final trimester. So
look, I agree with you. There are some extremists, and I've written about this. An old friend of mine named Florence Kennedy, who was a very strong supporter of abortion, said there's no difference between an abortion and removing one's appendix. Of course there is. Nobody has ever regretted removing their appendix. The appendix is not potential life. So yes, whatever happens in abortion, there will be restrictions. Nobody today who's reasonable is arguing for unlimited abortion. Some people are, but I don't think that's a reasonable position. I think a reasonable position might leave it to the states to, within certain parameters, and that's what Roe versus Wade did, by the way. It permitted the states to ban late-term abortions. It just didn't permit them to ban early-term abortions. Now the case before the Supreme Court involves 15 weeks, abortions after 15 weeks. And there's no reason for the Supreme Court to overrule Roe versus Wade. It doesn't have to decide this case. And it would be an overreach for the Supreme Court to overrule Roe versus Wade in this case. Maybe there'll be another case. Oklahoma has just passed a much more rigorous statute prohibiting abortion at any point. And that would be an occasion for overruling Roe versus Wade if there were 5 justices to do it. But it would be reaching out to decide it on this case, because this case doesn't raise that issue.
yes, of course, you oppose the overturning of Roe versus Wade, but as I've said before, it's a decision that has divided the Supreme Court for decades. So, I mean, if the if the status quo stays the same, then well, we will see further divisions where the Democratic presidency, if Joe Biden continues to be the president, will nominate someone who's pro-Roe, and then the Republicans would do the same, and then the cycle goes on and on.
Well, that would happen either way. Even if Roe versus Wade is overruled, there will still be efforts to overrule the overruling, and presidents will appoint people based on those criteria. Remember that, excuse me, the major decisions in Roe versus Wade were written by justices who were Republicans and not Democrats. Blackmun was a Republican. O'Connor was a Republican. Roberts is a Republican. So it doesn't fall neatly along Democratic Republican lines. It is much more according to ideology. It's true more Republicans favor restrictions on abortion than Democrats, but it isn't a one-to-one relationship.
So final question, because I'm mindful of your time. So what is the legal status of a fetus and an unborn child? Going to
Well, it depends. There was that great question asked to the new Justice of the Supreme Court, Jackson, what's a woman? And she said, I can't define a woman. It depends on context. And I think the answer to your question depends on context. For example, let's assume in the first month, a woman is pregnant and she tells her husband, I'm pregnant. And he says, oh no, I don't want this child to be born. And he kicks her in the stomach, intending to kill a 1-month-old fetus. That fetus has been murdered because the woman wanted to bring that fetus to life. On the other hand, maybe there is a right for the woman to abort that fetus. So a fetus's status depends on a great many external factors. I mean, everybody, pretty much every reasonable person acknowledges that even a 3 or 4 month fetus that endangers the life of the woman, of the pregnant woman, can be aborted. So you can have a perfectly healthy fetus, but an unhealthy mother, and that creates an issue different from other issues. So there's no simple answer to what is the status of a fetus.
Yeah, of course. And listen to what you've said, I'm sure that you are a student of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, because the opinions that you've stated perfectly align with their respective philosophies. And
well, I've written about both of them. I've written critically of both of them. I'm not a student of anybody. Let's be very clear about that. I don't follow anybody's philosophy rigorously. I follow a lot of John Stuart Mill's arguments, but I disagree with many of them. I disagree with a lot of Bentham's arguments. Bentham supported, for example, torture. I don't support torture, although I think it should be regulated if it happens. John Stuart Mill didn't answer some of the hardest questions. His views on free speech, I generally agree with, but his criteria for censorship are somewhat more stringent than mine would be. That is, he would allow more censorship than I would allow. So I read widely. I read St. Thomas Aquinas, who was brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. I read Maimonides, who was very influenced by Catholic theology and Muslim theology as well. But I don't subscribe to any. I am not a good Scotsman. I don't follow any philosophy to its end. I think for myself. I have been endowed, as you have, and everybody has, with an intelligence that allows us to make our own decisions. And I will continue to make my own decisions. And therefore, for a lot of people, my views are unpredictable, but they're consistent. I haven't changed my views very much, my fundamental views, since I was a college student.
yes, with that being said, Professor Alan Dershowitz, brilliant and controversial. Of course, whether or not you find any of his views agreeable or very not agreeable, or even if you disagree with his choice of high-profile clients, he is still a great voice to be heard. So thank you very much, Professor Dershowitz, for
Thank you. And I have to tell you,
you're
a great interviewer. You're a great interviewer. I really enjoyed your hard questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And take care of yourself. Shalom.
Sure. Shalom. You too.